Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. This is James and I'm continuing on with this Balsa USA Smoothie RC plane kit build. So today I'm going to be fiberglassing the center section of the wing. Alright, so fiberglassing the wing is not in the instructions. It's not in the instructions to do so, but I'm going to do it for a few reasons. One of them is because it's going to add sort of a protective shell, you know, on the top and the bottom of the wing in this area. It does add a little bit of strength, but that's not the main reason. In fact, it probably doesn't add really enough strength to do it just for that purpose. But I kind of want to protect this area. So this is going to be where, this area is going to be where the wing bolts come through, actually going to go in like this, and they're going to attach to the fuselage. And over time, those wing bolts, I'm going to be tightening them down. And this is kind of a soft wood in here. Obviously, this is balsa on the outside, and the inside, there's a little block inside there. So over time, I just want to protect this area from sort of that denting and pressing down of the wing bolts. And also, you know, that's going to be where there's going to be some stress from the wing actually when it's flying. So I do want to sort of just help kind of strengthen the skin, if you will, of the wing in this area where it attaches, where the wing bolts attach. The other thing is that the aileron servos are going to be in the wing, and there's going to be a wire coming through, and I'm going to put two holes in here, and then the wires are going to come through that hole obviously and attach to the receiver. But again, over time, you know, they're going to be getting pulled, they're going to be getting dragged around, and if this was just regular, just the balsa was just left as it is right here, it'd probably be okay. But I do want to just put this, by putting this little shell on here and putting the fiberglass over this, it helps protect that edge also. Okay, so lastly, I want to fiberglass this area because, you know, the fuselage is going to be up here up against the wing, and the edge of the fuselage is sort of a hard point and it's narrow, and that's going to be putting stress, you know, right in a sort of unconcentrated area along the wing. And not only is there going to be, you know, when I'm putting the wing on the airplane and adjusting it, it's going to get kind of dinged up, and there's pressure. I'm putting pressure on it. And also when the plane's flying, just like with the bolts down here, there's going to be stresses and movement basically in that contact with the fuselage. And by putting that fiberglass sheeting or that shell over this, it's just going to help protect the wing over time, I think. Okay, so let's talk about the materials I'm going to be using. So this fiberglass cloth is a thin one, and it has a weight of about 1 ounce per square foot. So it's not a real thick fiberglass cloth. And I'm going to be applying this with an epoxy resin. And I'm going to be using this Zap Z-poxy. Oops, Zap Z-poxy. And this again is just the finishing resin. And it works the same way as a regular epoxy, but it's just not used for bonding. You wouldn't use this to bond two parts together. This is strictly for just finishing surfaces. And the reason you want to use a finishing resin is because you can actually sand this nicely and create a nice smooth surface. It's actually workable, unlike a typical epoxy. You know, a typical epoxy, it cures up hard, but it has that kind of like plastic, kind of sort of like a hard plastic kind of rubbery kind of texture or consistency, and it's very difficult to sand and to make, you know, kind of sand out smoothly. So you wouldn't want to use a regular bonding type epoxy for something like this. All right, now like my regular epoxy, I'm going to be mixing it in a nice little cup in equal amounts, and then I'm going to apply it with this. Sponge brush, sponge brush. And I like these because they basically have a nice kind of straight and sort of relatively stiff, you know, applicator, and it's really nice for applying the epoxy using this. And I really like these. I do use like a regular brush, like a Bristol brush at times, but I really found these to be very, very useful for this. And I found this the other day. I was looking in my tools and such, and I found this thing. This is a you put this on a 5-gallon bucket of paint, and sort of like a spout to help kind of direct the paint. But it's actually it's stiff, but it's also flexible. And something like this is going to work really nicely. As you'll see when I get to it, it's going to be really nice to sort of help like push the excess material, you know, out and away. And it's really cheap too, so it doesn't look too fancy, but I think this is going to work out nicely for that. Again, you could use something like an old credit card, you you know, even maybe even like something like an old spatula, that type of thing is helpful for just kind of like moving the resin around. So I'll be using this, and I think that's about it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure. I'm going to cut my sheeting. I'm going to measure it out first. So I'm going to go a little bit wider than the middle of the airplane here, because I can always trim it off. And I'm going to measure this, and this is, let's see here, it's almost 4 1/4 inches wide. So I'll probably go about 4 1/2 inches. And let me see, the wing itself is on the order of about a little over 9. So if I can go about 10 inches, so I'm going to go about 4 1/2 by, you know, approximately 10 inches, and I'll cut 2 pieces of that. I'm going to start on the bottom, and flip this over here. I'm going to start on the bottom. Got this stuff starts to get everywhere. I'm going to start on the bottom, and I'm not going to wrap it around on the bottom. I'm just going to basically take it to the edge, and then when I get to the top, I will wrap the top one over on both sides, and that'll be the process. So let me go ahead and get set up. I'm going to go ahead and cut my sheeting, and then I'll go from there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut the fiberglass cloth. Now the fiberglass cloth is a little tricky to use because it is sort of fragile in the sense that it can kind of move and kind of flex and distort. It has the weave, but the weave is loose, and it's easy to get it to fray. It frays easily, pieces come out, so that's going to happen anyhow, but it is a little bit tricky to work with. So let me get my pen, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it with my X-Acto blade, and I'm going to measure. I think I said 4 1/2, but I think just to kind of keep it simple, I'm going to go 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wide. That'll give me a little bit extra room to work. And you know, I'm using my little cutting mat here, and I can kind of see through it, so I can measure it easily that way. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I was going to go 10 inches or so. I'm just going to go about, let's just go about 12 inches. That'll give me room to work. Because what happens is the more you mess with this stuff, the more it frays, or has a tendency to fray, and pieces start coming off, and so give yourself a little bit extra room to work with. So let me see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is like right here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and use a straight edge. Line it up here and hold that firmly, and hopefully you don't slip, and be very careful. Kind of run out of room here. Right about there. And then I'll do the same thing on this side. Actually, I'll cut this one first. Right about here. And I do have a bigger straight edge, but I'll just go ahead and use this guy. Again, I'm moving slow. Oops. Right there, my ruler moved a little bit, but okay, there's that piece right there. And then I'll do this guy. And it's kind of hard to hold it straight without it sort of slipping on you. Okay. Cool. All right, there's my 2 pieces. This guy and this guy. All right, so we're ready to go ahead and put this on. So this is going to go right here, just like that. Nicely, like that. So the first thing I need to do is I need to get my resin mixed. And I have my little cup here. This will be a 1-to-1 ratio. And I kind of have to estimate I don't want to use too much and waste it. I can always add a little bit more. This is 30-minute, by the way, this is 30-minute epoxy resin, so I got plenty of time to work with this. And if I need to add a little bit more, I can do that. Get this over here. And it's very thin compared to like a normal epoxy. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to paint this stuff onto the surface. And I'm just going to use the as a guide. I'm just going to use this edge as a guide to kind of eyeball it. Okay, now it's time for this stuff. Lay that down on top of there. Now I can use the brush, like I said, to kind of basically push the fiberglass cloth down into the resin up against the wood. Be careful on the edges because that's how you can get it to start to fray. Just press it down onto there. Give it a little bit more. The goal is to get the fiber or the weave to be really impacted with the resin. Now I'm just going to work slow and kind of work it in. Like I mentioned, I'm not going to bring it around. I'm just going to kind of take it to the edge. I'm going to trim that off, but I'll bring the top around. Now, as I mentioned before, you can use something like this to sort of try to remove the excess. Let's see how it works here. I don't want to be careful not to push the, so I can kind of push get the excess out of there like that. This thing's pretty handy. I think I got that at my local Home Depot. Okay, so as I work with this, as this is curing up, sometimes the fiberglass will, maybe it's going to bunch up or going to separate a little bit, have a little bubble. So I do like to kind of work it as it cures up, and this way I can keep an eye on it and kind of keep it from popping up if there has a tendency to do that sometimes, and just sort of watch it. And then as it gets closer to its curing time, then obviously at that point it will sort of just stick down and be fine. So I do like to sort of monitor it. The other thing I like to do is I like to bring a little bit of the resin out past the edge of the fiberglass cloth, and that's going to help kind of protect this portion of the wood as I'm sanding this down. There's going to be a little bit of an edge in there, obviously, because that's kind of where the fiberglass cloth ends. But I like to build up a little bit of resin along that edge so that when I'm sanding this down, I can actually kind of get a nice smooth transition between the fiberglassed area and then the non-fiberglassed area. So let's just bring this a little bit further over here. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and let this sit for a while, let it cure up, and we'll come back and we'll trim it and we'll do the other side. All right, so I actually let this cure overnight, and now I'm going to go ahead and trim off the excess material. Kind of see how that came out. It's nice and smooth. Let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and cut off the excess material. There we go. Now let's see the side. There. That. I'll clean this up. Go. All right, so that's good for now. When I do the sanding, I'll come up and I'll clean off the little bit of this extra stuff. All right, so before I put my next layer on the top layer, I'm going to go ahead and sand off this little edge in here. And same thing for this side. And I don't really have too much actually on here. I can probably trim this a little bit better actually. All right, so there we go. You did note that I did have to trim off some of the top and the bottom using scissors, and it does get a little messy. You can kind of see in the video, maybe you picked up that you did get some pieces kind of fraying off and little threads, and you can't really avoid that. At least I can't really avoid that. It always happens. But anyhow, just taking the time to blend it and to feather it in on top and bottom like this. And as I mentioned before, I'll monitor this as it cures up to make sure little areas don't pop up like this little area here. It is still, even though this stuff is sticky, when you do make a bend, like if you bend over something like this or you bring it around, you fold it over, it still has a tendency to sort of lift up. And so you just have to kind of watch it and make sure that you kind of keep it down. And I'll just continue to sort of like press it and watch it as it cures up. And then once it starts to get close to curing, obviously it'll get a lot stickier, and then everything will just lay down nicely. But until then, I'll just kind of keep an eye on it, and we'll let this cure up, and I'll come back and I'll trim it like I did the bottom, and do some sanding, and that'll be it for the center section of the wing for doing the fiberglassing. Okay, so I let this cure up for most of the day, and now it's ready to be finished. It's ready to be sanded. I did trim off the excess material that was on both sides like I did on the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and take this outside. Now, because it is a resin and it is fiberglass, I certainly don't want to be in here sanding it. I don't want to breathe any of that material in. So again, taking it outside, I'll wear a dust mask, and then I'll finish it up, and then I'll bring it back in, and we'll take a look at it. All right, so I spent about a half hour or so sanding down the center section of the wing here to kind of clean it up, and I think it's about as far as I'm going to take it. I may do a little bit more cleanup later, but for right now I'm going to leave it as is, and I'm going to move on to the next major step, which is probably pretty much the last major step for construction of the wing, which is to put the aileron, the wing aileron servos mounting hardware in, which is just basically blocks of wood that are going to go in the 5th bay over from the center. So they're going to go, let's see, they're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Right in here is where those are going to go, and that'll be the next video. So until then, thanks for watching my channel. I appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.